Well, hello, friends, and welcome back. It's been a hot minute, Judd, as they say,
Far too long.
since we've been on here together, and people are they're upset. They're saying, "Where are these guys?"
There are riots in the streets.
No, but we have more to talk about than people can bear. But but here we are anyway. So, what are we talking about today, Judd?
All right, we are going to talk about the languages in which the Bible was written. Now, when we say that, we always say Greek and Hebrew, and we leave Aramaic out. So just for the sake of accuracy, we will acknowledge that a few chapters of Daniel are written in Aramaic.
There's not a lot, right?
Right. So looking at Greek and Hebrew and thinking through how do we, with limited understanding of the languages, do something with them. What can we do with them? And also, what can't we do with them? Or what do the languages or study of the languages not provide for us? So I should certainly preface this video by saying that, Dan, neither of us are experts when it comes to this. It's been a dozen years since I've studied Greek or Hebrew seriously, so I've forgotten more than I know. But even with my limited knowledge, and I think I'm speaking for both of us on this, there are very helpful tools that we can do something with the languages that will aid our study of the Bible and our understanding of what God is saying to us.
Yeah, I think it should kind of just be said just as a lesson there as you talk about, ourselves. We both, have done undergraduate and master's degree work in to prepare for ministry, and that includes some languages, not extensively. But I think we probably have had more than most, and yet hopefully people will hear us say that we are actually want to be more cautious than we do authoritative when it comes to languages. And so we want to throw out some cautions there. That's certainly, this is one thing where it's easy to know just enough to be dangerous, as people say about a lot of different areas. And even within, I was just listening to somebody talk about a subject area, and they were saying even amongst like PhD biblical scholars, like not everybody is like into like linguistics like all the way in. So it's very easy to know just a little bit. It's very easy to think you know more than you know. And that's what we want to put a big caution on as part of our conversation today.
Right. So in that vein, I'm going to tell you two stories this morning as sort of a word of caution or kind of something that I learned along the way. And I'll do one using each language. Greek, of course, is the language in which the New Testament was written in the 1st century AD. And then Hebrew was used widely over the hundreds of years in which the Old Testament was written and compiled. So starting with the Greek one, when I first started studying Greek, I did a little bit of self-learning or kind of preparatory work before I went away to college and then started taking Greek in undergrad. And one of the things that I was really excited about was I knew in John chapter 1, in the very beginning of John's gospel, the Jehovah's Witness translation of the Bible is different than any of the Protestant translations that we have. Ooh, you can make it big. And so what the Jehovah's Witness Bible says is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God, rather than the Word was God. The Word was a God. So I was really excited to learn Greek so that I could prove that the Jehovah's Witness translation of the New Testament, specifically John 1, was wrong, right? And what I was very disappointed to learn is that in Koine Greek, biblical Greek, there's no word for a, the indefinite article. So that if you want to say the word was the God, there's a word that you can put in there, the definite article the. But if you wanted to say the word was a God, there's no word to use for a. It's assumed. So that by leaving it out, the translator has to decide, did the original author mean the word was God, or the word was a God? And I was very disappointed to learn. Now, theologically, we can answer this question very easily and very definitively, right? The word a should not be there. But the Greek language does absolutely nothing to get us to that answer. And so that's one of those times where I thought Greek is going to answer all of my questions.
Yeah.
And the reality is the languages often raise more questions than they actually answer definitively. So that's my first caution. If you say, I'm going to learn the ancient languages to answer all of my questions, you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
Now I'll give you a Hebrew story. And this has to do, quite honestly, more with what I'm going to call over-exuberant preachers and pastors, right?
We don't know any of those.
No, of course not. But there are other people who would do this, right? I would guess that every single one of us has heard at one point or another the Greek word means, or this Hebrew word means. And we need to be careful anytime that we hear that. When I was growing up, I heard a preacher give a sermon, and he mentioned the passage in Psalm 17, in which the psalmist prays and asks God to make me the apple of your eye. Now, that's kind of a weird expression. It's not really clear what it means, right? And so maybe the Hebrew will help us solve the problem. What in the world is the apple of your eye, right? And what the preacher said is that the word apple here is the Hebrew word for pupil. And the pupil of the eye is the fastest responding part of the body. If something is coming at your eye, your pupil retracts or does whatever pupils do faster than any other thing, any other part of your body. And so what the psalmist is saying here is God, would you be that for me, that you would come to my aid, that you would respond, that you would react to what's going in my life more immediately, more faster than anything else, right? Now, I'll be honest, I haven't studied this Hebrew word. I can't speak much to the language behind this. But here's one thing I feel fairly confident saying, that even if this word, apple, in Psalm 17 is a Hebrew word that's used for the pupil of the eye, 3,000 years ago, the ancients didn't have the biological understanding that the pupil is the fastest responding part of the Bible. I'm sorry, the fastest part of the body. Yeah. That's not what they were getting at.
But right? God knew, Judd.
And he knew that 3,000 years later, we'd figure it out. Right?
Yeah.
So anytime you hear one of these really cool, deep, here's what this word means, I want to encourage you to kind of step back and I want to be careful in how I say this, but almost always assume maybe not.
This is a good kind of, I don't want to say jumping off point, but this is a good thing for us to think about. So there's a couple different people who could be, well, the same person, but a couple different scenarios or situations they could be in. One would be, which we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about, they want to do some of their own research and study what can we reasonably do. But the other thing is, what do we do in that situation that you're in? Whether it's that, it could be a million other things. I think most of us have probably heard or said something, whether it's that, specific or not. But if you really knew that this word meant this, then you would understand this. And so we're left with, as hearers of a sermon or a teaching or a preacher on TV or the radio or whatever, how do we do what you're talking about? How do we, because here's the thing, Judd, if it's a genuine insight that has the receipts, so to speak, to sort of back it up, then it could be really edifying and interesting.
Sure.
But if it's not, here's the concern. Well, if it's not, it matters for a lot of reasons. But one of the things that happens is that these things that we hear, we tend to repeat.
Yeah.
Without doing any work, and that's one thing, I guess, if you're sort of, an average person listening, that's not to be diminishing any way, but if you're somebody who hears that and then you're a teacher or a preacher and you just choose to repeat that without doing any work, then that becomes more of an area of responsibility. So how should the average person kind of think about or respond or navigate that?
And so what we want to do is guard ourselves and have reservations without becoming jaded, right? Because I don't want to be constantly evaluating the sermon or whatever Bible study I'm receiving. I want to assume that the person who's teaching has expertise and work and that kind of thing to offer. So one thing that I'm thinking of is there's a very big difference between saying this word means and saying this word has a connotation of, right? If you think about English, I'm going to try, this is probably going to be a terrible illustration, but I'm going to try. If you think about English words, there are very few and maybe no English words that always have the exact same connotation and only have one specific meaning, right? Mm-hmm. We use words in such a broad way, and that's true of all languages, right? So let's say that the Bible was written in English, and thousands of years from now, people are reading it and trying to, they've translated into their language and they're trying to understand it. And a preacher says, here's a verse in this English Bible, and it says, the love of God is deep. And the preacher says, this word deep is an ocean word, a water word. And what it refers to is the depth of the ocean, right? And there's a place on planet Earth, it's called the Mariana Trench, and it is the deepest part of the ocean. It's the deepest place in the world. You can't get any deeper than the Mariana Trench. And the word that's used to talk about the Mariana Trench is the exact same word, deep, that's being used to talk about the deep love of God. So what God is saying is my love for you is the farthest you can get, the biggest. There's no more depth that you can get. Think of the Mariana Trench, right? It's the deepest thing there is, right? Now, if we could time travel and go to these people, we would say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Yes, it's true that we use the word deep to talk about the Mariana Trench, but we also use the word deep to talk about a million other things. And when we say the word deep, we're not always thinking about the Mariana Trench. I might look at a 2-foot hole in the ground and say, whoa, look at that deep hole, right? And so to say this word means that every single time the word deep is used, we're thinking of the ocean is 100% incorrect. It's one connotation. So I can give a sermon illustration in which I talk about the deep love of Jesus and I talk about the deep love of the Mariana Trench and I compare the two, as long as I'm not saying this word means this. Mm-hmm. Rather, I'm painting a picture, right? So I think there's an enormous difference between saying this word means and saying this word has a connotation of.
Yeah. Plus, when you're in the depth of the Mariana Trench, you breathe, and so you drown, and the pressure is so great that it will crush your skull. Welcome to the deep love of God. It makes perfect sense, right? So it all kind of falls. So here's what I would give as some thoughts for people. One thing is so that if you're in a local context where you are engaging with the teaching and preaching of, say, your pastor or a Bible study leader or something like that, and things like this come up, I think it's a great opportunity for a conversation. Not necessarily every time, but it will be nice to know kind of where that person is getting their information. And I don't mean that, like, as you mentioned, with like a critical stance of like, I'm assuming you're wrong about this.
Right.
We want to give the benefit of the doubt, particularly to people that we're in relationship with, and trust. But I think, and I say this, not being hypocritical, that, I'd be happy to have this question asked of me of something like that. Well, so like a sample question would be like, how can I learn more? Like, where can I go to read more about that?
Right.
Or how can I, dig in, or, where did you learn about that?
Right.
And that will give some idea. Again, I don't think in any of these cases people are poorly motivated, or at least in most of the cases. But oftentimes, Judd, in my experience, we repeat things that we've heard, or sometimes read, and sometimes when I say read, I mean more popular level things, and not really done the work.
Yeah.
And
there's a danger of I think, just, some of these things are really cool and they really work, and we just overplay our hand and push it too far, right? Yeah. I'll give you a great example in Exodus 34, which is one of the great, we've talked about this passage in other contexts. It's one of the greatest descriptions of God in Scripture. And one of the adjectives he uses, now, again, depending on English translations, there's two words, merciful and gracious, and sometimes they're switched, using different English words for the different Hebrew words. But one of these words, and I'm not going to be able to tell you which one it is off the top of my head, but one of these words, when God says, I am gracious, this is an adjective that is related. It's not the same. It's related to the noun womb, right? If you wanted to say the Hebrew word for the womb, right? So God is not saying, I am womb-like to you. He's not saying, I am a womb and you're my baby and you're inside my womb, or that, right? It's not a one-to-one, but the graciousness that God has for his people is linguistically connected to a womb. And if you think about a mother with a child in her womb and the way that she cares about that child, that is a beautiful picture of the way that God loves and cares for us. Yeah. The word doesn't mean that, but it helps us think in those directions, right? And so there's beautiful, wonderful connections that we should make it. We just can't go so far as saying this word means womb, right? That kind of thing.
Well, sometimes it's just be careful about how how tightly you wrap the connections and that kind of thing. So yeah. So if you guys are following along here in this moment, or you're watching this later on after we're live, we'd be happy if you would share examples or maybe things that you've wrestled with or heard, but you say, I've heard this, but I don't know, how would I figure out if this is the case, or not.
So
those kind of things could be helpful.
All right. So we've talked a lot about warnings. Yeah. Now let's kind of pivot, because the reality is, studying the languages, knowing a little bit of the languages, being able to use the languages, does open up awesome, exciting avenues of thinking about and studying Scripture. So let me share with you now a story of how I think this can be and is very wonderful as we think through the text. I think one of the most rewarding pieces that the original languages brings out is seeing words that are used multiple times, specifically by the same author, and especially within the same book of the Bible, and sometimes even in a short amount of text. And you say, wow, this word keeps showing up. I think he's doing that intentionally. And again, because of the way translation works, sometimes there'll be one Greek word that's translated into 3 or 4 different English words. Yeah. And that's not a wrong translation. It's not bad, but we miss, whoa, he's he wants us thinking about this word, right?
Right. Yeah.
A really cool example of this is in the book of John. I think most of us would be very familiar with the I am statements that Jesus makes throughout the Gospel of John. And I hope you're aware that the I am is connected to Exodus chapter 3, when God reveals himself to Moses in the burning bush, and Moses says, "What should we call you?" And the way that God refers to himself is I am. And this leads to the divine name Yahweh that the people use, referring to how God spoke about himself. So very clearly, I think Jesus is picking up on this, and he's saying, "Hey, remember Yahweh? That's me," right? And he's making that connection with these I am statements. In Greek, verbs don't need a pronoun. So that in English, if I wanted to say I ran, or he ran, or you ran, I have to have the I, the he, or the you, so you know who I'm talking about. If I don't have that, if I just say ran, who was doing the running? There's no way of knowing. Greek doesn't work that way. There's a verb ending that's part of the word. So you can just say ran, and based on that, you know who was doing the running. I was doing the running, he was doing the running, you was doing the running. But you can add the pronoun kind of as adding emphasis. And this is where it gets tricky, because sometimes you're adding emphasis and sometimes you're just including the pronoun, right? But it could, if you added the pronoun, it could have the idea of I myself ran. Who did the running? It was me, not anyone else. I was the one doing the running. There's a little bit more emphasis there. When Jesus uses the verb to be, am, he uses the pronoun with it. So that a very wooden literal translation of what he's saying is I am, or I myself am, something like that, right? Which again, he could be just saying, other than nobody else, me. That's who I'm talking about. But he also could be and I think he is very intentionally saying, I am. I want you thinking of Exodus 3, that kind of thing, right? And most of the times we get this. I am the bread of life, I am the door, I'm the gate, these kinds of things. In John chapter 18, the soldiers come to arrest Jesus, and they come to the crowd and they say, "Who's Jesus?" And Jesus says, and most English translations have something along the lines of I am he, or it's me, or me, something like that. And the soldiers fall to the ground, right? And the English masks a little bit, just with adding that extra word he, I am he, that what Jesus is saying here is the same thing that he's been saying all throughout the Gospel of John. I am, right? The guards that come to arrest Jesus aren't falling to the ground because Jesus says, none of these other guys are the guy it's me. And they say, whoa, we didn't expect him to have a beard. That's not what's going on here. Yeah. Jesus is using the divine name, I am. And the guards fall to their knees, right? And so one of the really cool things about knowing the Greek or reading the Greek of the Gospel of John is you pick up on this phrase, I am. It's everywhere in the Gospel of John. And sometimes the English draws our attention to that, and sometimes, again, not intentionally, not in a bad way, but sometimes the English masks that a little bit. Yeah. That when we read I am he, we miss, oh wait, what he said was I am.
Yeah. Or probably somebody would even say it's me or something like that, or even further away. Right. Because the translation is trying to get across what they feel like is the main idea in it. And there's a lot that's missed. So like in the example that you just shared, Judd, there's objective things that can be seen with the tools. Like if you have an interlinear or a Greek text, you can see that that's indeed what's there on the page. What that means is we can think about and talk about. I think it makes sense what you're saying. I see you're reading Pat's comment there, so
Yeah.
might as well just put it up since you're not listening to me anyway. Pat says, here's my thoughts. What is your feelings on this? I am distinctive, and God's declaration to Moses is that it doesn't have a predicate nominative. Oh, Pat, here we go.
Well, but there's a really good point to be brought out of it. So finish his thing, and then
if you've forgotten your high school grammar, the predicate nominative is the second half of the sentence. For example, I am the good shepherd. Say to the children of Israel, I am has sent you. There are 3 times in the Gospel of John where Jesus says, I am without a predicate nominative. These passages seem to be more about, and Pat types more than this thing will allow. So.
All right. So Pat, you pick up on 2 really important things, right? So I assume where you're going with the second half of your comment that we can't see is that it's significant that Jesus is doing the same thing that he did in Exodus 3, right? That he's saying I am without the predicate nominative, right? That's odd English. We want the rest of the sentence. You are what?
Would that be like the example of like before Abraham was I am, like that? Would that be one of the examples?
Yeah. So John 18 that I mentioned, I'm not positive what the third one is in John, but I'm sure Pat's right.
So what Pat's bringing up is the idea that is he perhaps making more of a connection to deity or his divinity in those.
Yeah. So in John 14, when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, is he saying I'm Yahweh here? Maybe not. Because if you wanted to say I am the way, the truth, and the life, he's saying it the way you would say it, right? I think there's a nod there, but maybe it's not quite as strong as these 3 times where he simply says, I am. Yeah. Now, the other thing that Pat brings up that's so good is he throws these $2 words at us, predicate nominative, and we say, what in the world? I have no idea what these were. And I don't know. I couldn't have told you that, right? That the predicate nominative is the second half, because we don't learn our grammar that way. But if we did learn our grammar that way, we would understand the original languages, especially Greek, so much better. Because Greek is able, in English, we're kind of tied into word order. If we want to say something, the words have to go in a certain order to make sense. Greek, it can be all over the place.
Yeah.
And so knowing the parts of speech, knowing what a predicate nominative is, knowing what a subject is, knowing what an object is, right, is enormously important for helping us to understand what the passage is trying to say, what the author's trying to say. So the better you know your English grammar, and I'm no example of this, I'm terrible at English grammar, but the better you know your English grammar, the more you're going to be able to do with Greek.
Isn't it the case, though, with the example that Pat's sharing, that comes through pretty much in English translation? That there's no, I am what?
Well, in John 8, it does. Before Abraham was, I am. And we say, wait a minute, that's weird. What's he doing? Oh, he's saying he's God. But in the example from John 18, if we translate it, it's me.
Okay.
We missed the fact
you said earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So, if an English translation were to botch John 8 and say, before Abraham was, I was. Yeah. We would say, okay, that makes good English sense. We would miss the theology, and we would miss, why are they picking up stones to try to kill Jesus? All he's saying is that he's really old. No, he's saying a lot more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the context ultimately becomes, always extremely important. There's not much that kind of overrides that. And so when things happen, we've talked about in previous videos, like that ought to give us cause to think. If Jesus says something and the response is huge, we want to kill you, we should be thinking, okay, if what we read there was kind of felt like not much, but they want to kill him, right? That should be a clue to us that we need to do some more thinking, because something more is going on there. So in in a lot of these cases, I think and this, I guess, falls maybe in the more in the camp of those who are maybe teaching and communicating, that we can say, as we sort of know things, that it is the case that, this is here, this is not here. What does that, isn't that curious? What does that mean? Here's one possibility that I'd like to suggest to you. Mm-hmm. And what that does is it doesn't give a definitive necessarily thing. And I think it invites other people to also wrestle with and think about it too, at the same time giving some space so that if our conclusion isn't absolutely correct, it's not like we overstated.
Sure.
I think that's what I want to be careful about. Bringing up possibilities and connections, and wouldn't this make a lot of sense if this is the case, in such a way that doesn't, because if we continually say things, Judd, that prove themselves to not be true, after a while, we kind of cease to be pretty trustworthy teachers, which becomes, I think, at least in my mind, that would be concerning for myself.
Absolutely.
And others. So let's talk a little bit. We're half an hour in here. We don't want to be here all day. So let's talk a little bit about, I want to talk about word study, because I think that's where things come up, I think, the most. Like this word, you've mentioned like connections and that kind of thing some already, which does show up a lot. But
the great reality, and I think this is where you're already leading, but is that we live in a day and an age where obviously learning Greek and reading it fluently would be the best case scenario.
Right.
But we don't have to do that. So if you're listening to this video and you're thinking, okay, great, if I could read the Gospel of John in Greek and find every time Jesus says I am, that would be really helpful. I can't do that. What other options are available to me? Right. And I think that's one of and this is where we want to go with this, is that there are wonderful resources available, that there are ways we can dip our toes into the languages and reap a lot of benefits from that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So there's a couple kind of, types of resources or types of study that you can do. One is to find things like lexicons or dictionaries. Lexicon is kind of a fancy word, right? That you can find a word and then get a description of it, like we could do with an English dictionary. We could look up a word and it would have a meaning or several meanings, oftentimes, that it could refer to. And these are they're useful tools, and there's several of those that you can purchase or resource of various different levels. But here's something that I want to say about that as also a word of caution. And then I want to suggest something that I think is an even additionally, but an even better first resource. The problem with those things, Judd, and it took somebody really pointing this out to me to really fully realize it, is that they're not unbiased. So when you read something and you say, oh, I have this resource book, and I looked up this word and it told me this is what it means. Well, that could be that person's theological tradition. Sure. That says that that's what that word means. So that's not to say that those things are not useful. I believe that they are. I just say it to say that it's not the last word.
Sure.
What you really want to look for, and the best of those resources will also do this, is how is this word used across, in our case, primarily across the Bible. You mentioned earlier, Judd, within one particular author or one particular book. Now, we tend to look at the Bible from the vantage point of this is God's inspired word, and it's kind of all just this one thing.
Sure.
And it's true that it's God inspired, but different places in the Bible, different human authors of the Bible can use the words sometimes in different ways or with different nuances at times. And so seeing how the breadth of how a word is used, it is, I think, probably the best or the first line kind of approach. And I'll let you share thoughts in a second. But the problem is that, and you mentioned this earlier, oftentimes, different English words are used for the same Hebrew or Greek word. And so just reading your English Bible, we sometimes come up short.
Yep.
share some thoughts.
I was chuckling to myself when you were saying that. I was thinking, imagine if you were to write a letter and I were to write a letter, right? And just the differences that you and I have in personality and speech pattern and thinking and whatever else, and comparing that to, say, a letter of Paul's and a letter of Peter's, right? And that there would probably be words, and I couldn't even say what they were, but there would be words that would show up in your letters a lot that wouldn't show up in my letters a lot, and vice versa. Or maybe you would use a word a lot and I would use it one time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the questions that we ask when we're reading Paul's letters or Peter's letters is, wow, Paul uses this word all the time. Peter uses it once. Does Peter mean the same thing by it? Does he have the same connotation in mind as Paul did when he used it all these multiple times, right?
Yeah.
The other piece is, we talked about looking for words that are used a lot. The other thing that's very important is when an author uses different words in a short span, right? Romans chapter 5, Paul is talking about essentially what we would call original sin, right? And he uses different words to talk about Adam's sin and Eve's sin. And English is going to do something like transgression or sin or deception or, these kinds of things. I think there's a huge theological point that Paul is making. And if an English translation uses the same word throughout, again, it's not wrong. It's not inaccurate. It's not a bad translation, but we're going to miss, oh, wait, I think he's saying Adam and Eve did two different things. And now that I'm saying that, I'm not even sure if Eve is mentioned in Romans 5, but I know there's different words used for sin in Romans 5, and there's something going on there.
Right. So by doing a so in some cases, like we're taught in English when we're writing, use different words, like find synonyms, right? We have the thesaurus that we kind of flip through. Sometimes I've not done that in a long time, but and sometimes, a biblical author could be using different words to get at just kind of painting a picture of something. But in other cases, it could be using a word very specifically. So, in that example, so if you see a word that's translated transgression, instead of just assuming, oh, that just means sin generally, it's possible that word has particular nuances. And so by not just looking for every instance of anything that sounds like sin, but say, how is this word transgression used across the Bible? Could give a little bit of a different idea or a nuance there.
Right. So, let me just correct myself because I was wrong. Eve is not mentioned in Romans 5. So a better example would have been if I had said the word that is used in Romans 5 for Adam's sin is different than the word that's used in 1 Timothy 2 for Eve's being deceived. Right. Is there something going on there? And I would argue, yes, there is.
Yeah.
Right.
So let me go ahead.
All right. So backing up to what you said about lexicons, dictionaries, I think there's even a better place to start before getting to those. Those are helpful. And you're going to laugh at me because I don't have the digital copy. I have the physical copy. But this is Strong's Concordance. There are many different concordances. Strong's is sort of the definitive one. The downside to Strong's is that it uses the King James Version translation into English, but you can find them in every English translation of the Bible, and they're probably all available on Google. I mean, this is a widely used resource.
Right.
The wonderful thing about a concordance, so this is a dictionary in which you can look up the words in English. It uses, you don't need to know any Greek or Hebrew to use it. So you can look up a word that shows up in the Bible. And what it does is it does provide you the translation into Greek and Hebrew, but it numbers all the Greek and Hebrew words, right? So you look up your word love, say, and you say, okay, this word love, I don't even know what the Greek word for love is, but I know that it's number 1734, right? Then you can find all the other examples of love that are also 1734.
In the concordance.
In the concordance, in this exact same book. You just need one resource. And you can find the words of love that are not 1,734. So you can say, okay, this verse talks about love, this verse talks about love, but they're using two different words. They're not connected to each other, at least linguistically, in the word that they're using. But here's two examples where it is using the same word, right? So with knowing zero Greek, zero Hebrew, you're already beginning to plumb the depths of saying, okay, here's something going on with this particular word.
Okay.
Now, both with concordances and then with your lexicons as well, what I would add, this doesn't work for Hebrew as well because Hebrew is a little trickier, but certainly for Greek, it's not difficult to learn the Greek alphabet. And if you don't even have to know what the letters mean, how to pronounce them, but if you can recognize the Greek letters, just kind of learning the English alphabet, learn the Greek alphabet, it opens up enormous ability to at least read the words or kind of sound out the words and then look them up in these kinds of resources.
Yeah. So I'll suggest what I think is one better from your giant book, which is another pretty big book that actually it connects totally with that one. And it's this. You've probably heard of interlinear. I know you have, but our audience have heard of interlinears. This is just for the New Testament, this resource. There's different versions of this, but this one, if you're somebody who's a pretty serious student, I very much would recommend this. If you want a print book, if you want to do a software version, I can suggest something as well. But if you're somebody that's always like, I want a book in my hand to hold, what this particular one does is word study Greek, English, New Testament, and I'll try to get some screenshots and post them in the comments later as well too. But what this gives you is an interlinear that's got, you're not going to see it very well, but it's got the Greek text with an English word that they feel like most closely represents it underneath. It's got the NRSV in the column here as well. But Judd, to your Strong's point, so it's got the Greek text, an English word next to it, and then the Strong's number that you mentioned next to that. Now, in the back of this, it has all of the most common usages. So you can turn right to the back of this one book and have a mini version of that giant Strong's. So the most common occurrences you'll find right in the back. You just find the number, you find this number, and then if you want to go even more of the numbers not there, then you have your big Strong's that you have. Right. But this gives you both your Bible to sort of find. So instead of saying, is this, because if you have your English Bible, you could say, okay, I see love here. Is it what word is it? Whatever. This will tell you exactly what word it is. Right. And it'll also help you to sort of see the Greek words like you were talking about there in front of you. So this is 100% recommendation for me. Yeah. If you're in the area, I have 3 or 4 copies of this. I like it that much to be able to lend out or hand out. Judd, do you have a good free online resource that lets people do any of this? Or I don't really know of anything great myself.
Yeah. So I often use BibleHub.com. Also has an interlinear Bible. Okay. And the thing I like about that, because again, my Greek is very rusty, and let me, we're talking mostly about Greek in this video. Everything we're saying about Greek applies to Hebrew also. Hebrew is just a lot more complicated, and the reason for that is there's that many more differences between between English and Hebrew than there are between English and Greek. So that's why we're using Greek as the example. Yeah. And the thing I like about Bible Hub is if you scroll over the word, much like your book in hand does, it'll give you an English translation of it. So very oftentimes, if I'm rusty and I'm just not remembering what is the translation of that word, that's my go-to online resource. Yeah. Looks like Pat has
one too, so you can click that link and see what that has to offer too. Let me show you real quick, and I don't want to go real long here on time either. And we've kind of more, I think, Judd, we've done probably more with the caution area than the helpful area. here today, but that's okay to a certain extent. But we do want to, continue to give people more resources. I am a user of Bible software, and let me just show you. I'm going to share my screen here for a second, and just to give you a little bit of a look at this. Can you see that?
Yep.
Can you see that up there, my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So there's a couple different Bible softwares you can purchase. One is Logos, which is a very popular one. It's a very resource-rich tool. I have that. I prefer Accordance, which is another one that's very text-based. But in this case, you can do things like search for a word. In this case, I'm doing a search on deacon. And then you can hover over it. I think you said you could do that kind of thing online too. You see down the bottom there, it gives deacon. It's got the Greek, diakonos, and then English kind of transliteration of it. It also, Jed, you see there, has that number.
I was going to say that G1356 is the Strong's number.
The Strong's number. So this is tagged with Strong's numbers. You can, in software like this, you can click, and then you'll get your lexicon entry that will give you. You'll see here several different possible meanings, and it will have different references. And then there's different lexicons that I have in this collection or purchased of varying levels. There's a good sort of basic one. This BDAG is very extensive, and it will have things from in the Roman world around as well, the Bible, how words are used and that kind of thing. So, this, I just wanted to share this to say this is something, if you really want to do more research, you can purchase a Bible software. You can do things like pull up the Greek and see here, as I hover over a word, it will hover over the same word in my English translation next to that there. And then I can copy that and search, and it will show all of the instances of that Greek word, not only the English gloss of it. So that's just an example of. Let me stop sharing that. I could do a much more in-depth thing on that, but so depending on how much you want to dig in, you could purchase a Strong's Concordance. You could purchase this book. You can start to play with some of these free websites, like the Bible Hub or the one that Pat mentioned. I think is a great way to sort of start to dip in. And if you find that, man, this is something that I just really want to dig into, particularly if you're a preacher or teacher, you may want to be into more of these resources. So that's just a little bit.
Yep.
What do you think?
Pat's got another question. Yep.
Are there any important differences between the Textus Receptus and the Nestle-Aland for study in Greek Hebrew? I use both. The Textus Receptus, I don't think has a ton of value anymore. That's the tradition upon which the King James is built. There's two. This is too much in the weeds, probably for most people, Judd here and Pat. But there's two as far as Greek. There's two different kind of modern critical editions, and critical means, well, not what you think it means, but that sort of mine through the oldest and most reliable of manuscripts to give one collection of the Greek text. We should do a video sometime, Judd, on textual variants, because it does come to things.
Yeah. So that'd be fun. So, yeah, the Textus Receptus is just fancy Latin for received text. I believe was Erasmus, a contemporary of Martin Luther, Protestant Reformation times. He did a Greek New Testament. So I think this is over my head, but I think Textus Receptus and Nestle-Aland are both just Greek. I don't think that's Hebrew.
Wasn't the Textus Receptus Latin though? Before I'm out. Pat, you may know more about this than.
Yeah, well, he made a Greek translation, which I think that's what. In any case, Nestle-Aland is going to be the older of the two. And Nestle Aland just it's the guy's names that edited it, that compiled it.
There's also a United Bible Society edition, which is very similar to that. So just, I mean, real quick, if people are just totally like, which is probably most people, what in the world are you guys even talking about? So there's various, there's no like first century whole New Testament that's been sort of handed to us that we have. We have various copies of different letters, gospels, all these different documents from various, they were copied by hand in various ages, various places they were copied. And so what these folks do is try to get the most reliable, consistent, oldest, generally all things considered, copies and put them together, to give us a complete document that we can work with. The challenge with, and in general, one of the challenges with the King James version is they did a great job in 1611 with what they had to work with. They had the absolute best of manuscripts that were available to them in 1611, but there's been so many more ancient manuscripts that have been discovered since then.
Right.
that is, I think, universally just not the most reliable tradition to work on. Although, like you said, Pat, if you want to bring that in addition to another edition, then that's fine as well. Does that make sense? Judd, you look more confused than me even. So
no, I'm trying to think, and I think again, this is one of those important places where it's important for us to say we are not experts, yeah. Right? So I don't know. If you're reading those two, are you going to find differences? Probably.
You will. There's things that aren't. So, for example, when you read the King James, if you have a King James Version Bible open next to it, there'll be some significant difference, not just in word choice, of course, but there's sometimes things that are in there that aren't even in any other modern English translation. Because why is that? Because none of the oldest and most reliable manuscripts have it. Sure. So let me give you an example. Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, when he says, "Why shouldn't I be baptized?" Or what prevents me from being baptized? Basically, in most English translations, and I'm paraphrasing somewhere here, not pulling it up. Basically, they go for it. But in the King James, it says, "Well, if you believe with all of your heart and soul, whatever, then," which, that's this textual variant conversation. So why do some things have it and some don't? But when they go through, and so the Textus Receptus would have that upon which the King James is built, but so many other older manuscripts don't. So how do you decide what's closest to what would have been the original, right, of the book of Acts? That would be a difference in the way that different manuscripts would show up. Right. Sometimes in the footnotes of this is a different conversation. All right, I'm going to pause. All right, let's do takeaways. Let's wrap up. Let's do takeaways, Judd. This big conversation. I suspect we're leaving people here more confused, perhaps, than helped. Which I don't know, is what it is. But what do you want people to walk away from this conversation with?
Yeah. It probably, if I were to sum it up into one sentence, I would say that study of the ancient languages doesn't always do what we expect it to do, right? That gets into kind of the warnings of what we were talking about at the beginning, but does offer a depth in our study of the Bible, right? So that if you say, I'm going to learn Greek or I'm going to learn Hebrew to answer all my questions, don't bother, you're going to be disappointed. If you're going to say, I want to learn Greek or Hebrew or study Greek and Hebrew so that I can dig deeper into the text, that's exactly what you're going to find. And the second piece I would say is that there are ways to learn Greek and Hebrew without learning Greek and Hebrew, right? That simply learning the Greek alphabet is going to allow you to access certain tools that you wouldn't otherwise fully grasp, right? When you do that, once you've learned the Greek alphabet, you're not a Greek expert. Don't go around saying, I know Greek and here's what this Greek word means. you know just enough to be dangerous. I've taken 6 years of Greek. I know just enough to be dangerous, right? That's the kind of pumping the brakes that I think, especially like we talked about at the beginning, as preachers and teachers, we need to do.
Right. Yeah. So I would say be very cautious, but then wade in. Okay. Right. So like be aware that, you know, don't think you're an expert at one time. And it just amazes me. Even experts, there's things that are, you see, like, you know, we used to all believe this about Greek tenses 10 years ago, and now we know, oh, there's a bunch of exceptions to that. So be cautious. And in particular for, you know, for preachers and teachers or people that want to post, you know, kind of things that sound definitive on Facebook or whatever, be cautious. You know, use words like may mean, or, you know, seems to have a connection to, perhaps, then this means this. When you hear somebody say something that you don't know how to see if it's correct or not, ask them very openly and giving the benefit of the doubt, but say, how can I learn more about this? You know, where did you learn about this? That, you know, those kind of things. But then start to wade in. Get some resources, like, you know, play around on the website. Get some resources like this. Get a Strong's Concordance. You know, start to look, but just be cautious as you do so. I think you'll see some great things. You'll learn a lot. And I would encourage people to do that, to wade in. But, you know, so, all right. Thanks, guys. Again, whoever's watching this later on, feel free to leave thoughts, comments, questions, etc. And we'd be happy to follow up if there's more things. In particular, I would love to do some more test cases, even if there's something that you've heard, but you don't. But you say, I've heard this so many times, but I don't know, is this true or not? You know, maybe we can do a good sample study at some point. So
that'd be fun.
All right, guys, have a great day. Bye.